All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, you staying? Well, Cleo didn't get the message that it's a bad idea to give me a platform and a captive audience. So I am lucky enough that we're going to run through our lesson this evening. Tonight, we're going to go with, let me give you a little bit of background. I do most of my teaching with the youth. I'm not real good with slides and things like that because, to be honest with you, when I'm doing my lessons, I require feedback from you guys, and I never really know where my lessons are going to go. So for those of you that are used to having the slides and things, I'm going to apologize now because I didn't give those guys one. Although I could have played this different and just been like, slide. But I didn't. So I just thought about it, or I would have. But tonight we're going to talk about not by riches. When I'm teaching with the youth, I usually like to start with a question, and they usually just stare at me for 10 minutes until they realize that I'm just looking for broad answers. I don't have the answer most of the time. But tonight, I'm going to start with a really simple, easy question. Everybody's got the answer. How much money is enough? Anybody want to throw out a number? Anybody want to throw out a number that's defendable? All right, let me ask you a different question. How much money is a lot of money? Enough. About $50,000 more than I make. That's about right, especially with gas prices. So let me ask you this question in a different way. How much of money was a lot of money when you were a child? So now we've got answers, right? $5, $10, starting in little lemonade stands, selling lemonade for a quarter. Your parents are like, I got to pay for all this lemonade. So what's the difference whenever somebody asks you that question now than when somebody asked you that question when you were a kid? Experience? Life experience? Responsibilities? Bills? You learn the value of money? I put forth perspective as the difference. All of those things roll into perspective. Luke 12:21 reads, "So is the one who lays up treasure for himself is not rich toward God." 1 Timothy 6:10 reads, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with so many pangs." Money is the root of all evil. Lesson over, we go home. I think Cleo would be mad at me if we didn't at least talk about it a little bit more than that. Because is money evil? The love of it, right? All the way back in Genesis, I think this is probably the best and earliest perspective of the difference in how people look at money with Abraham and Lot. Genesis 13:8 and 9, "Then Abraham said to Lot, 'Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left.'" What is he saying here? And what? He wasn't after wealth. Is that what you were going to say as well? So he's looking at this thing and he's like, money's not important. That's not what we're doing here, right? Abraham was pretty well off, was he not? I mean, well off in a different aspect than what most of us would. If we lived our lives with camels and tents, that's not true. If my wife had camels, she'd be pretty content. But most people aren't going to be content living our lives in tents, living on camels, looking for water. But that was wealth. So he looked at Lot and he said, Lot, you pick. You go one way and I'll go the other. Lot had the first choice. Lot chose the easy water. Was that the wrong choice? From a purely business perspective, was that the wrong choice? No. That's the way I would have picked too. I don't have camels, but I've got pigs and I've got goats and I have to carry water. So if I had the option of going this way with all this water and this option over here that didn't have it, I'd probably choose that too. But Lot set his sights and he moved toward... Ooh, I thought I was going to sneeze real big into that microphone. Lot made his choice and moved toward Sodom. Now, we already talked about Sodom a little bit. But he moved toward Sodom. Now, he didn't move into Sodom. He moved toward Sodom. And I think that's the emphasis here. He did not move directly into Sodom and lay down all of his possessions and lay everything down and just say, hey, I'm going straight into sin. What happened there? He set his motion on his business. He set his motions into, got to make more money, got to get more camels, got to get more tents. And we do all know the end of the story with Sodom. And that ended very poorly for Lot. I'm really trying to sneeze into this mic. But again, was it the money itself that we have an issue with there? No, it was all the stuff that came with it. He lost perspective of what it was really all about. Jeremiah 17:11, and this is a fun verse for me. Like the partridge that gathers a brood that she did not hatch, so is he who gets riches, but not by justice. In the midst of his days they will leave him, but at the end he will be a fool. Now, I've never seen a partridge. I don't know if partridge is really a thing other than they live in trees and we sing songs about them at Christmas. But I've got chickens. And we've got a broody hen that's constantly sitting on eggs, and I don't have a rooster. So we feel bad for her, and sometimes we let her sit on the eggs, and sometimes we don't. But a lot of times, and I feel like this is where Lot got to, he got so preoccupied with his eggs and gathering these eggs and looking for more that he lost his way. He lost that perspective. Do we have that issue with us on a regular basis? I have that issue. I lose perspective pretty regularly. Moving in into Ecclesiastes, and this is a lot of the youth. This is actually the class I'm teaching right now is Ecclesiastes, and my wife, who's hiding back there, when she found out that I was actually going to get to teach, she said, "Oh, that's a direct quote." But I told her it's okay because just in case I needed it, I brought my soapbox, so I can stand on that in a minute. But for me, Ecclesiastes is actually the first place I went to in my mind whenever Cleo asked me to teach this sermon. Because I think everything comes back to Ecclesiastes with these perspectives and what's really important in life. Ecclesiastes 4:8. One person who has no other, either son or brother, that there is no end to his toil. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, "For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?" This also is vanity and unhappy business. What is that verse talking about? Who is that describing? One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and in his eyes are never satisfied with riches. Anybody? Who's that describing? Well, Solomon wrote it. He's talking about himself, right, in most of these verses, or we think he is. But how many of us are businessmen or women, and we work 40-hour weeks, and that's it. We're done. I know very few businessmen that work 40 hours a week and call it a day, especially if they're running their own business and they've got people depending on them. One of the things that my wife and I, back when we decided to start some of our property stuff and decided to get into our animals and things like that, if you haven't noticed, we have some property and we're running a little farm. But one of the things that we're really wanting to do with our farm is to offer almost a retreat for this very thing right here that we're fixing to talk about. Because it has become such a problem in our current society, we've lost focus about what's really important. We've completely lost focus on what's really important. We're so worried about making that money to buy this stuff, to pay for the car, and now to pay for the fuel to go in the car. We love our kids so much, we completely forget about them so that we can buy them their tablets and their phones and their, I don't know, whatever it is I'm stubbing my toe on this week. That's what he's talking about here. We've decided that what is important in life is that money, that coin, so we can go and trade it for the next big fancy thing. This is a common problem. If this isn't you, this is somebody you know, is it not? We lose track of what's really important. We're losing track of our family. We forget why we're working all those hours. And it becomes the reason for us to live. If you look at the celebrities today and they are making all this money, the baseball players, basketball players, the football players, the movie stars, how many of them are happy? I'd be willing to wager and even be willing to defend that a vast majority of them aren't. We see the suicide rates, right? And not just with the celebrities, but across the board. You look at our social medias. Everybody's living a perfect life until they're not. We find ourselves in search of this all-holy dollar. But if money is really what is going to make us all happy, why are we all so miserable? Why are we all griping at each other? It's not about the money. It's about what we're going to do with the money. It's about our perspective behind the money. 1 Timothy 6, 7 through 9. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. How many of us came into the world with money? Anybody? I didn't come into the world with money. How many of you are planning on taking money with you when you leave? You know, one of the people that I grew up idolizing, honestly, and it was actually the grandfather of my high school girlfriend. And I mean, they had money. He was one of those guys that you looked at and you wouldn't have ever said, "Oh yeah, he's got money," because he just didn't act that way. But he had it. And when he passed away, the only request he said, "I don't care what you do, but you put me in a pine box." And that was incredible to me. It knocked me over. It really did, because he was adamant about it. I mean, to the point where he had it in his will. And in his mind, this is what he took. He said, "I didn't bring anything in, and I'm not taking anything out." It didn't make any sense to him, all these ornate decorations on his casket. He wanted a pine box. I'll tell you what, that was the fanciest pine box I ever did see. They honored his wishes, but I tell you what, it was a good-looking box. So now we're coming into the audience participation point of our lesson. Because now we quickly went through these verses because these people are a lot smarter than I am. So it's a lot easier to lean on some of these guys. But so far we've decided that money's not the problem. So what are we going to do with it? We've only got a couple options, right? We keep it, or we get rid of it. So how about we keep it? What's the problem with keeping it? What's the problem with the money when we keep it? It's useless. It's useless? It doesn't serve a purpose? Right? But if you spend it, you go out and you spend it on that car, that's sinful, right?
Oh, you may be creating employment, you give somebody else an opportunity to eat, to send their kids to school, to contribute to the church, etc., etc.
What you give to God, you always heard goes up to heaven. So if you don't send anything up there, you don't get a very big house.
In case you didn't hear what he said.
When the guy got up there to heaven, he said, "Where's my house?" And there was a little tiny shack. He said, "Well, we did the best we could with what you set up there."
He said, what he said for those in the back, what he said was, he got up to heaven and he just saw this tiny little house. And he said, "Where's my big house? Where's my mansion?" He said, "Well, we did the best we could with what you sent up here." That was good. I told him to say that, by the way. So we've got this money and we've decided we can't just keep it, right? Because it's not going to do us any good. So we can spend it because we're building up the economy, right? So now our job is just to blow the money, get rid of the money. That way the evilness is elsewhere. What's the problem with that? So you don't have any? Again, we come back to the point that money's not the problem, right? Huh? It's the way you use it, right? And it's not my job to decide what foundation you donate it to, right? But it's where your heart is with this money. It's how you spend this money and how you are. Are you stretching or did you have something?
Scott, I love the verse that says, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money, it's the love of money.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at our heart, it's always looking at our heart. And, if money is your idol, put that before God, everything about, your love of money, then verse stands.
1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." And that's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. So it's how we're spending this money, right? It's the emotion behind it. It's the feelings behind it. And for me, I think it brings in, the parables with the farmer and the sowing and the thorns. You can't just walk into a building and throw money in the air and call it a day, right? How many of y'all donate pretty regularly or semi-regularly to these charitable foundations that you see, the Red Cross, United Way, any of those? Does anybody? Do any of us? How many of y'all have researched those companies before we donate to them? And I'm not talking about individual organizations. I'm not gonna step on my box over there. There are great organizations out there that take their money and they put it in great places, and it's great. But how many of you have heard of these organizations? You give them their money and 90% of it goes into somebody's salary and very little actually gets done with it. And it happens a lot. It happens a lot. You know, and like I said, that's not even what we're talking about here tonight. But if money was the problem, would Abraham have been given the riches? I would say no. I would say no. And again, going all the way back to Abraham and Lot, right there at the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis, he sets the foundation for how we should be operating. Because far too often, money comes in between all of us. And at the end of the day, what is the only thing that truly matters? Serving God. I would venture so far as to say our relationship with God. And that's what these kids, and I keep pointing over here because this is where I'm used to them sitting. So these two beautiful young lads right here, these young kiddos right here, I preach to them to the point where it's basically a dead horse. I'm just beating. Relationships. Because we walk around in life and we think that money is what's going to make us happy, right? I'll tell you something. A lot of y'all don't know me from that long. We've been attending here for 13 years. Like I said, this is the first time somebody messed up and gave me a microphone. But in my lifetime, now if you ask these kids, I'm 24 years old. I'm going to let you on a secret. I'm not. All right? But in my years walking the earth, I'd venture to say that at certain points in my life, I made a lot more money than a lot of y'all sitting here. And at certain points in my life, I had to make a decision whether I was going to pay an electrical bill or a water bill. I have been lucky enough to dive in almost every place in the world that I've wanted to dive, except Australia. I still haven't gotten to the Great Barrier. I've had jobs that put me rubbing elbows with crazy money and all these galas and all these things, and I've been a fireman for 10 years. And let me tell you, that's the opposite of that. But I'll tell you what, in every one of those years, I've had good days and I've had bad days. And we all know that not having money can lead to very difficult and stressful times in our personal lives, in our marriages, in our relationships. But we always tend to come back to the point where it's the money's fault. We either have it or we don't. It's the money's fault. But I put forth the fact that it's not the money's fault. Because money cannot make you whole. What makes us whole? Serving God. Our relationship with God. And our relationship with each other, who's helping us keep us in the right place with God. I don't know how many of you, my wife's like, she's just like, I can't believe you're bringing up the animals again, but I don't know how many of you have ever raised a pig. But I think I think a pig has the best life. I really do. At least maybe it's just our pigs. I don't know. But we also, let me back up a little bit. When we raise our animals and we try to humanize them in such a manner that people can come in and pet them, right? That's part of something we want to do. In keeping with that, we raise certain types of pigs, heritage pigs. And some of our pigs think they're dogs. And by that I mean I have a boar that will not eat until I scratch him behind his ear. And that's a real thing. And he's ugly and beautiful and awesome. This pig lived in my house for 2 weeks because it was too cold outside. A couple weeks ago, we got a couple of sows, and these guys are really going to be the workhorse of our farm. And the first night we had them, I've got a picture of them sitting in front of the oven. We were cooking pork. I felt bad for the pigs. But it was warm, and they were happy. And these pigs, and some of these pigs are just going to grow old and retire on our farm. They're going to make more pigs for us. They're going to make more bacon. I call them bacon seeds is what I call them. But at the end of the day, these pigs are never going to have $1. They're never going to have a coin. And these pigs are happy. One of the other things I get to do with the youth, and again, these two youths right here, is actually, I'm wearing the vest right now. We're in an organization called Elevate. We get to climb mountains every summer. I know y'all see some of the announcements up here if y'all read, where we have our meetings and we have our trips and things like that. And I'm not going to give you an advertisement for Elevate, although it's the greatest thing ever. Your kids should all go. But I'm not here to do that. But the thing about this trip is watching the kids figure out that they have no stuff. They have no stuff. I have seen kids on the first day up the mountain pick up a rock in the shape of a phone and carry it for days. I don't worry about it till they start talking to people. But we've conditioned ourselves to stuff. And on this trip, day one, they're, like I said, picking up rocks. And they're like, this looks like a phone. They squat to eat. They don't want to get their pants dirty. We've had people bring curlers up the mountain in their packs. I don't know where she was going to plug them in, but she brought them. That's right. But something amazing happens every year. Every year, this amazing thing happens. Because we get to day 4, and we call it's a solo day. And we send them, and we spread them out across the mountain. And they have to spend, we tell them a minimum of 2 hours. And then we'll call you home. And every year, it's like, what do we do? Go? Yeah, but what do we do? And they figure out it's not the stuff. It's not the stuff. They figure out it's their relationship. They have conversations with God that they don't normally have. And they come back, and that night at dinner, they're just laid out in the mud. They're just laid out in the mud because they don't care anymore. And if it was up to me, I could live my life that way. Give me a couple logs to make a house out of, 5-gallon bucket for a shower. Luckily, I'm married, and she says no. But it's not about the money. It's about our relationship with God. It's about taking the joys out of life of these little things, these little camping trips in my world, these animals. The look on my kid's face whenever I send them a meme, partially because he's like, you know what a meme is? That goofy little smile my wife gives me whenever I make a joke that's just not even funny. And there's a lot of those. But we get caught up in what brings us happiness. And almost in every example, it always goes first to money. Last Wednesday, whenever we did the intro for this lesson series, that was the first example, money. And for good reason. We have to use it. We get to use it. Could you imagine still being in a barter system where you got to bring your 300-pound pig and toss it across the counter and get... But we have to be careful not to get sucked into this pattern. We have to be careful not to forget that the money itself is not what brings us joy, is not what brings us happiness. But it's God. It's our relationship with God. And that's hard to do. That's real hard to do. Now we're at that point in the lesson where I throw it back out there and I say, anybody got any questions? Anybody disagree with what I have to say? Elaborations?
You got a smart pig.
I got a smart pig? I got a bunch of smart pigs. Not the ones in the oven.
It's not just money, there's just too much stuff going on today. Technology, lying there's no proof. And it's at a time that I wouldn't want to be a teenager. When I was a kid, we could go work. I was in elementary school mowing yards for money. Kids can't hardly do that anymore.
No, they can't. And I agree with you. I think, like I said, I've been blessed enough to Jordan's let me work with these guys on a regular basis, and man, I love it. And people ask me, they're like, would you go back? And I'm like, not in a million years. I'm 24, I'm still young. But you're absolutely right. They've got, it's a whole different world for these guys over here. It's rough.
I've often heard that if you want to find out where your heart is, look at your checkbook. Because where your money goes, that's where your heart is. So no matter how much you have, how much you don't have, where your heart is, that's where your money goes.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I had somebody tell me one time, they're like, well, you can say things like that. And this is actually something we talk about things like this quite a bit. I was a fireman for 10 years, and money was constantly being on there. And one of the things that got brought up was, and my wife and I do the same thing. When we walk into a restaurant and we see a table full of, troopers or firemen or whatnot, we try to pick up their tab, right? And we talked about in the fire service, and I had, I'm going to call him a friend. We didn't hang out a whole lot off shift, but, I kind of relied on him to keep me safe and vice versa. So it's hard to call that person anything but a friend, right? But he was kind of jaded. He had a poor perspective on life, and that's what he would say. He would say, well, they must be rich. I couldn't afford to do that. But that comes back to your heart, right? Because you're absolutely right. I couldn't afford to do that every time I walked into a restaurant anymore and I saw a table full of troopers. There was a time in my life where it wasn't a big deal. But it's right here. Because if you're sitting there saying, oh, well, if I do that, then I can't go and do this. It's not about that. It's a matter of putting yourself out there and saying, hey, I'm going to take care of you today. I'll worry about me tomorrow. I like that checkbook. Say that again. What was it? How did you say that?
If you want to know where your heart is, just look at your checkbook.
If you want to know where your heart is, just look at your checkbook. I like that.
If anybody has a checkbook.
Say again.
If anybody has a checkbook, what is it?
Anybody's got a- I'll check my app. Does anybody else have?
We kind of, I think we put a lot of our faith in money to deliver us from our problems. That can be really distracting
Mhm.
when we should be looking to God to deliver us and lead us through it. But we kind of lose faith. So we trust in material.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, how many of you, and this isn't one of those, ooh, me type things, but thought process. How many of you do that and say, God, I'm going to give it to you? Right up to the point where things start turning around. And then you, I got it. I'll raise my hand. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Anything else? Anybody else?
I think possibly your beginning idea, initially how you framed it with perspective, is often how when you view money as yours, you've made the first mistake.
Ha.
Because it all came from somewhere else. Because if it's your job and your kids and your car and your house, you've gone a little over past the point. That it's just a resource you're allowed to steward the channel rather than something that you own or have.
Absolutely. I wish you had the microphone tonight. They- Well, next time they put it on me, I'll bring it over to you. Did y'all hear what he was talking about? He was talking about the fact that right from the beginning, the way I started, he said, that was right, except then you messed it up. That's basically what he said. But he was talking about the fact that as soon as we start looking at the money as ours, my money, my kid, that we've already messed up. And I agree with that 100%. You know, and in the my kids part, that's, you know, I talk about that all the time. And again, here I am pointing over here again, but, you know, there's people literally spread out across this auditorium that are helping raise my children. You know, and yes, they're my children. Anybody that knows them knows they're my children. But they're going to learn from people all over the place. And they're going to bring back those things. On a good day, they get to teach me too. So yeah, those are my kids. But at some point, those kids are no longer going to be my kids. They're going to be, in my case, young men. But in a general term, young men and young women. They're going to have to find their own way.
You know, when Joe would sacrifice after his children had got together, and he didn't know if there had been any sinning going on, drinking or whatever, and he took those kids, he took his family as his responsibility. And that was his emphasis.
Mm.
It wasn't about, as far as I could see, he wasn't overly zealous pursuing money, but he was planning.
Mm. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I think sometimes God calls us to give when He is well aware that we don't have it. I think of the widow of Zarephath and Elijah.
Mm.
And ultimately, boy, did her fortunes end up positive. But the Bible says that God directed her to give to take care of Elijah, and she did. And oh my gosh, look at the results. So it's not always when you have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do when you don't have it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and I mean, that's exactly right. I don't think I could say or elaborate on that anymore. It's not about how you are when you have it or it's when you don't have it. I think it's beautiful. We pet them and then we eat them. Yeah. So we have our animals that we've named. And then they turn around and make dinner or breakfast on a good day lunch. Yes, we're in the very beginning stages of production where we're actually selling and distributing. So
So how about inviting us all out once in a while? I'd like a little pork at your place.
it is in the works. It is in the works. So we all right. Before we get into this, has anybody got anything to say about the lesson? No? We actually do. We have plans to be able to be set up in such a way that, in all, and I brought it up a little bit, and I really am trying not to run commercials over here, but we really are. That's one of the things that we're really wanting to work on is that aspect of, as a society, we've completely forgotten about what life is about life being in those relationships, and we work ourselves just silly so that we can give our kids everything that they need except for what we give them right here in this building. Because it's not about what we're doing in this building, it's about what we're doing out there. And with that, we've got plans for cabins and, basically a really tasty petting zoo. But our plans are hopefully to have everybody come out. So, but it's so that we can teach and do and offer a place to do what we've been talking about tonight. Anybody else got anything that they want to add or argue with? Yes, they're going to be my test pigs. Actually, the youth group may be out there next weekend if I can't find another camping spot. All right. Do you guys already have somebody for a closing prayer? No? You want to come do a closing prayer?